You're listening to the TV Obsessive channel, presented by TVObsessive.com.
Hello and welcome back to the TV Obsessive podcast. This is episode 8. I am Ryan Kirksey, writer and contributor to TVObsessive.com, and I am joined as always by Caemeron Crane, executive editor, TVObsessive.com. And Caemeron, I know you're from Detroit, so based on what we're talking about today, how much do you hate the Lakers and the Celtics?
Yeah, I feel like I should clarify a little bit. I mean, I am from Detroit. This has come up weirdly a lot here on the podcast, so I just want to tell people it coincides kind of interestingly with the Pistons question in a way. So I lived in the Detroit area from the time I was born, 1980 until 1992, and then moved to Ohio. But yeah, so my entry point into basketball really kind of was largely as a fan of the Pistons here in the 80s. And you're absolutely right that meant hating the Celtics and the Lakers because they were like constantly in the way one way or the other. But it's weird in retrospect. I don't so much, and like maybe it's in part because I moved to Ohio, and then I ended up becoming a Cavs fan, and then I tried to be both a Pistons fan and a Cavs fan, and that worked for a while until the Pistons played the Cavs in the playoffs. I think this was like 2007.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was just wholeheartedly rooting for the Cavs. So, kind of interesting on that front. Did you mention any? Did you tell me before you were a Celtics fan?
No.
Okay, I don't know where I got that.
So I grew up in Houston and have been a Rockets fan for as long as I can remember. But my earliest basketball memories are us realizing that, because I think it was 81 and 86, that, it's just impossible to beat the Celtics. We faced them in the finals both years. I was really young, trying to see, we have a chance to win this thing, but no, it's impossible to beat this Goliath that is the Celtics.
You had a lot
those
of
are my
pain there.
earliest basketball memories.
You had a lot of pain there, the Rockets, because you just like the Buffalo Bills of the NBA.
Buffalo Bills brings up another sense of pain for Houston fans, but that's a different show.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm just thinking because the Rockets made the finals a couple times in the '90s too, is that right?
We won. So this is my also basketball heartbreak. So I have, for most of my life, lived in the Houston area. There are 2 years of my life that I lived overseas. My dad's job took us overseas, and we lived in Europe. The 2 years that I was over there were the 2 years that the Rockets won the championship. So I was unable to be in town, didn't go to the parade, didn't see the games, none of that. So I was still suffering from that 30 years later.
That's a bummer. This is we're interestingly, I'm going to go ahead and do this. It's a tangent that they put me in mind that I think it was in 2007. The Cavs went to the finals and lost to the Spurs. It just so happened that I took a trip to France, and it's the only time I've been to Europe. It was a great trip. It was awesome. But we had no TV. We're like in this little villa in southern France and all of that. And because of the way the timing worked out, I was going to miss the first 4 games of the NBA Finals. And the Cavs were in the finals, But I thought, well, I can come back in time for game 5, presuming there is a game 5. And I sort of blacked myself out on the news, which was very easy to do. We didn't even have a TV or anything like that. And as we were going to the airport to fly back to the States in Perpignan, France, we're waiting for the plane, we're in the gift shop, whatever, and I looked down at the newspaper, and on the front page of the newspaper is Tony Parker holding the MVP trophy because the Spurs had swept the Cavs, and I didn't get to see a single game of the series.
Yeah, that was what's often referred to as the worst supporting cast to ever make an NBA Finals, all on the shoulders of LeBron James.
Yeah, I mean, it's like here, I'm lamenting that I didn't get to see my team lose terribly. You know what I mean? But still, it was just kind of like, oh man, we didn't even win a game. And of course, Tony Parker is very big in France.
Exactly. Well, we're bantering about basketball because we are gonna get into the first episode of Winning Time today, a show on HBO about the rise of the Lakers dynasty in the 1980s. So we're going to touch on that later, and we'll spoil some of that as it comes up. But as we normally like to do, we've got a few other things to touch on, some things in the news that caught our eye this week. We want to just touch on a few things, a kind of a light news week. We'll get to a couple of things, and then just in a non-spoiler way, what we're watching, what's caught our eye on the screens over the past 7 days or so. So why don't we jump into any news that's come up? Cameron, anything caught your eye?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I know we have a few things that we're planning to hit on. We're recording here on August 8th. It was on Friday, I think, that there was a meeting between the WGA and the AMPTP. I guess we can hit on that. Not much came of it.
Right.
My understanding is they were saying during the meeting they wanted to not say anything to the press, like it's supposed to be confidential, and then some reports started coming out like the AMPTP was saying things or leaking things or something like this, and then there's an official response from the WGA, which I read. So this is not super promising, like even those broad strokes, right?
Right.
But I guess from what I've read, there was some indication the AMPTP was potentially willing to negotiate on some of the AI stuff. It was maybe a little encouraging. And maybe something about pay scales to some degree, but that they said during that meeting that the demands about maintaining writers' rooms and residuals on streaming are non-starters, and those are kind of the big issues. So I don't know. Increasingly, I think we're kind of in for the long haul here.
Yeah, and I wonder what the long haul is. We do kind of speculate about this. It seems like every week, and I think that SAG has pretty much signaled that they're going to do their thing once they feel confident that the WGA is moving forward on whatever their agreement will be. I don't know if they're planning for those dominoes to fall in that order, but yeah, this may still be months and months ahead of us.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've seen, just thinking about things, I've seen a couple of different people speculating. The residual thing is interesting because there's a question of, well, how do they calculate this with streaming? And I understand that's complicated, but you could figure out a way to do it, even if it was imperfect and more straightforward than it should be, right? Like you don't actually necessarily have to correlate views to dollars in a way that's precisely accurate or something like that. They could do it based on views. I don't know. That's a big sticking point, but I've seen multiple people speculate that it's possible that the streamers are, well, one of two things. They don't want to be transparent about their data, either because they're doing way better than people think, or they're doing way worse. And I don't know. I find myself increasingly worried that it is the latter, and that they don't want to let Wall Street know what their numbers actually look like.
Yeah.
And that they're afraid to do that.
Yeah.
And insofar as coming to some kind of deal about paying something like residuals for streaming, I think that would have to involve a certain level of transparency. And I don't know, that has me a bit worried. But
yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up with the streamers, because there's something we've talked about a couple of times that I wanted to segue to that was in the news the past few days. Well, we've talked about this rebranding that HBO did from HBO to HBO Max to now just Max. That's their streaming service. And so Warner Brothers, the parent company, came out this week and said that in the 3-month quarter that included the rebranding period, that they lost almost 2 million subscribers to that service, right? You had to move from one app or one piece of content platform to another when they moved everything to Max, and they lost almost 2 million subscribers when they did that. Is this surprising to you that removing everything and having people go to a totally new platform, they lost this many people?
I don't know. I mean, it's not super surprising to me because you can count me in that number.
Yeah.
for whatever that's worth. Not trying to make a thing out of it. You know, there's an inconvenience to it. I thought it was interesting how they timed it. As I recall, they timed it like right before the finales of Barry in Succession. So like, hey, if you're watching these shows, oh, well, you've got to switch for the finale.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. HBO is interesting in general because they do have the cable network. I have no idea what their numbers are like when it comes to premium cable subscriptions. You know, that gets lost in this
Yeah.
to the extent that you know, it does really feel like we exited the age of cable TV and entered the age of streaming, but cable still exists. It's just not the same, and it's not a lot of people's primary source for television. But I don't know. I'm realizing now. I want to look into the numbers on that. Maybe we'll, you know, return to this down the line. How many people still watch cable?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think it may be more than we realize in a certain way. You know.
Yeah, if I remember correctly from reading this, and we can post the link here to the article that talks about this news that came out, is there's still dozens of millions of people that were still signed up for the cable linear HBO, right? So they still have that really strong, I think, foundation of people that pay for that service, either as part of their cable package or sort of standalone thing. So this was really just in the rebrand of the app that I think someone confused us that they were going to remove the HBO name from it and go straight to this Max platform. So yeah, so this is just streaming that we're talking about here. They have apparently a pretty healthy foundation of those that still subscribe to the cable side of HBO.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because Warner Brothers has that, and they also have, you know, of course, the film division and all of that. You know, but the move towards we're going to focus on the streaming app. We'll just have to see what happens. I really don't know, because it does seem like there are some indications that it's not going to work to flood the market with all of these different streaming services, and there might be some big changes on the other side of this, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just found it interesting that they've couldn't carry that many people over, particularly as you said, there was a time where if you wanted to stick with their flagship shows they had on in the spring, then you had to make that move, and apparently a lot of people didn't.
Well, but see, we can also get into our weird little like media bubble or something like this.
Yeah.
So we're like, oh, but it's Barry, it's Succession. Everyone watches Succession. No, they don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the most viewed show in the US is like NCIS or something like this. It's just the numbers are dwindle things like these HBO shows. So
I think the highest viewed episode of Succession still had something like less than 4 million people that watched it.
Right, I think probably more people are watching Jeopardy, but we've been on the Jeopardy beat a bit, so there was a little bit of news on that this week.
Yeah, and I've been driving the Jeopardy train. I don't know why. I mean, it's because it's my favorite game show, and I'm invested in its success with this post-Alex Trebek, post-pandemic, post-strike situation that going on. But updating something we talked about last week, the Tournament of Champions, sort of their key players came out and said, we're not participating in this show at all. If you have recycled, rebranded questions, when you don't have the writers involved, we want to stand in solidarity to them. But now the producers have said, we are going to go ahead with a season that uses some recycled content, not only recycled questions, but recycled contestants on the show. So they're going to bring back people from seasons 37, 38, 39 that lost and put them against each other with old questions that have been used before.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this was kind of interesting. It's kind of a cool gimmick in a way. I'll give them that. It's kind of like the second chance tourney, right?
Yeah.
And I think it also is strategically kind of smart on their part, because you might imagine new contestants saying, oh, you know, we're not going to do this either. You know, like we're going to be in solidarity. But people who were on before and lost might be a little bit more likely to go ahead and do it, I guess. I don't know. They're probably going to get enough people to do it.
You know, I dug into a couple of things about this, and I found one interesting quote from a producer who said, we didn't feel like it was fair to new contestants to the show to put them through recycled questions. And they made it this thing like, it's this, I mean, it is an honor to be on Jeopardy, but if we're going to have brand new contestants, they deserve the writers there giving them new questions. And so they sort of we're driving the decision of using old questions and old contestants. And they found enough to make at least half a season to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't really think that.
Yeah, we'll see.
Unfair to new contestants. Like, okay, maybe. I did see that they're maybe going to do Celebrity Jeopardy, or at least they're still trying to do Celebrity Jeopardy.
Celebrity Jeopardy was written and finished, at least the part that involved the writers before the strike.
Yeah, but I'm wondering who the celebrities are who are going to be on it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know who would. I don't know the bylaws and points of the the agreement that would or would not allow them to participate in a show like this, but it'd be interesting to see who they could get.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I understand it, which is not perfectly, so people listening shouldn't like take my word for this by any means. You can do your own research. As I understand it, I think that even actors on strike could potentially do it, from what I've read.
Yeah,
I could be wrong about that. Whether they'd be motivated to do it, whether they want to do it. I'm kind of curious, like who wants to do it?
Exactly. Well, last week we had a trio of people that we said farewell to. One more I just wanted to touch on this week. You've been a Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul watcher, I know, in years past. And we lost a really great actor, Mark Margulies, who played Hector Salamanca, he of the wheelchair and Bell that became famous for. I don't know. Think of a better actor, actress who did more with fewer words than Mark Margulies. I think it was pretty incredible what he was able to do without ever saying a word in that show.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did have some lines in Better Call Saul, right?
Better Call Saul,
in the beginning. But yeah, no, it was really kind of touching to see some of the tributes on social media from Bryan Cranston and Bob Odenkirk and others, yeah, so I mean, I don't know how much more to say about it, but I certainly he did a whole bunch of other stuff, of course, also, but his performance as Hector Salamanca, as you say, was super impressive insofar as he managed to convey so much when mostly it was without speaking. It was ringing a bell, was facial expressions, and yeah, so it's real loss there.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's pivot a little bit into things we are watching currently. We've talked about there's some things on the horizon, but are we in a lull period right now? Have you found anything new to watch over the past week? So let's stick with some of the things you have been before.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of a lull we're in, other than I'm just thinking like, well, I mentioned these things on the podcast already, Justified, which is ongoing, another episode tonight, Foundation, which comes out on Fridays, Winning Time, of course, which we're going to dig into the first episode that premiered on Sunday. So I'm watching all of those things. And I've been continuing on watching Evil, which, I didn't watch when it was airing. I've kind of been binging it. Yeah. My version of this, which takes weeks. So, what about you? What have you been watching now?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned a couple times that I'm looking forward to the Ahsoka show coming out on Disney Plus the end of this month. So in doing so, I want to do something which I've not done before, which is go through Star Wars Rebels, the famous Dave Filoni animated series from the 2000 teens that aired for 4 seasons. And I will tell you something, if you go on X or Twitter or whatever it is these days and ask for information or what to look out for, what are the episodes you should watch on Star Wars Rebels, you are going to find a whole hive of people that are just fanatics about this show. I had somebody send me a spreadsheet of the most important episodes, the details from those, the time of each one, sort of if I had a day to watch, if I had a couple of weeks to watch, if I had a month to watch, or broken down. And so there are some fanatics to this show, but I'm enjoying Rebels so far as I prepare for Ahsoka. But that's perhaps not surprising that there's some really diehard Star Wars fans out there.
Yeah, I think we knew that. But so are you trying to watch all of it, or are you taking some of this guidance and just kind of trying to pop into what they're saying is important?
I am trying to go through all of it. It's 4 seasons. Two of the seasons have 15 episodes. Two of them have 22. But, they were on whatever the Disney Channel. So they're 21, 22 minutes each. So not too much of a burden. So I'm going to try to get through as much of that as I possibly can before, I think, August 23rd or 26th when Ahsoka comes out. So
Yeah,
it's a fun little show with some interesting philosophy and interesting look at some characters that a lot of people are familiar with. So if you haven't checked it out, it's a nice easy binge if you like Star Wars. And then the other thing that I got caught on to now, this one, a lot of times I take your recommendations of things to watch and I add them to my list. I have one that my son has turned me on to. Okay, now my son, who is quite the cinephile, loves Simon Pegg and Nick Frost movies. So Shaun of the Dead, The World's End, Hot Fuzz. He loves those movies. So he's just like grasping for, is there ever going to be more of them? And in looking for this, he found on Amazon Prime a show called Truth Seekers with Nick Frost as the lead, a little bit of Simon Pegg, but it's about a couple of guys who sort of moonlight as ghost hunters. And it's just one season, 8 episodes, really fun British humor. If you like those movies, it is quite an entertaining and funny look at their style of humor. So if you're in a Simon Pegg and Nick Frost sort of desert looking for some of their content, it's quite a funny show. We're about 3 or 4 episodes in right now.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I feel like I've heard of that before and I haven't watched it. How long ago did that come out? Do you know?
So it came out in 2020, one season, and then Amazon Prime canceled it. So there's no more. It's just the 8 episodes. But I mean, if you just sort of stack them all up, they're about 30 to 35 minutes each. You basically got a new long Simon Pegg and Nick Frost movie, and it's pretty funny.
Cool. Yeah, I enjoyed Shaun of the Dead in particular quite a lot. When it came out, I mean, it's still good. I think I haven't watched it in quite some time. But when it first came out, there was something really kind of striking. I think it was on the early edge of some of the stuff that was playing with zombie tropes a little bit.
Yeah.
Like it's the first zombie comedy I remember. And there have been other zombie comedies since, for sure. Santa Clarita Diet,
exactly,
TV show, but then also
exactly.
Film, so. All right, cool. Well, so I'm going to dig into winning time, I guess.
I'd love to.
Ready for that? All right. So as per usual, I'm going to take just a quick little break here, like a few seconds. And on the other side, we're going to start talking about Winning Time. Season 2, Episode 1 premiered 2 days ago, right? So if you're not up to speed, be aware that on the other side of our little break here, there will be spoilers for Winning Time Season 1, sure, and also the first episode of Season 2. All right, well, so let's pick up with talking about Winning Time. Perhaps we should hit briefly on Season 1. General thoughts about the show?
Yeah, I think that'd be good, just to kind of give a reset for what this show is. It is, I think it's technically branded a sports biography, and it documents basically the decade of the 1980s, or we believe it's going to document the entirety of the 1980s decade of the Los Angeles Lakers from Season 1, which was the rookie season of Magic Johnson and their victory over the Philadelphia 76ers in his rookie season. They won the NBA Finals that year. And then it looks like, from what we can tell in this season, that it's picked up after that, and it's going to cover a period of the next, looks like 3 or 4 seasons. But whereas Season 1 was documenting Magic Johnson, his rookie season, conflicts with Captain Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's sort of getting into the twilight of his career, Dr. Jerry Buss, who just purchased the team and is dealing with not only the dynamics of running that team, but his own family dynamics. And then just sort of this miracle story of that team battling through a lot of things, including an injury to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson playing center in Game 6 of the NBA Finals. They win. It's sort of this magical Cinderella season, and so now it's picking up. So what does the team do after such a phenomenal run through the league and a championship win? So the season sort of sets there or starts there, but as we talked about, that's not actually the first thing we see in this first episode of the second season. Do you want to comment on what we saw there?
The first episode of the second season or the first season? What are you trying to set me up for?
This episode that aired on Sunday. It doesn't start right on the championship, right?
So we start with 1984, them leading the 1984 finals, so Game 1, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as you say, it seems like the setup's going to be that we'll circle back around to that, because they start with the aftermath of Game 1 and
right.
Coming out to the bus and little speech from Pat Riley and all of that. And then they go back 4 years and pick up more or less where season 1 left off, or we're going into the following season now. So I do think that's kind of interesting, because season 1 really took its time working through that first season. And now with season 2, we've actually got fewer episodes, but it looks like they're going to cover a greater time span. So we're going to go through 1982, 1984. And then I don't know what might come after that. We'll speculate about that a little bit ultimately. But what do you think about the show in general? You were mentioning, so like the end of season 1, they win the championship. Yeah. I actually was recently watched a video of the actual people after they won that championship. Have you done this recently, like since the show came out?
No, I've not done that specifically, but tell me more about it.
So it's like, this is the actual footage. You can find this on YouTube of them awarding the championship to the Lakers, to Jerry Buss, the real Jerry Buss, and then they go and they cut to the interview with Magic for the MVP and all of that. Pat Riley is in this footage as well. I mean, the biggest thing that was striking to me was when you watch the show, it has such of a style and a vibe of that early 80s, late 70s, kind of thing going on. But it's actually really part of what I enjoy about the show a whole lot. And you've got John C. Reilly's Jerry Buss, which I think is fabulous. This is part of why I was looking at the footage, though, right? It was like, okay, well, what was Jerry Buss really like in 1979, 1980? It's pretty similar. Like, he's dressed like that in the actual the footage and all of that.
I think that this show, one of the things it does well, and part of it is the cinematography, part of it is just sort of how it sets its characters up with a backdrop that is very accurate in terms of the period that we're dealing with in the early 1980s. But it's a good job sort of reflecting the time period that we are in, right? So there's sort of the early 1980s, Los Angeles, right? We're about to get into the heart of, I mean, like, not only Showtime Lakers, but big time Hollywood, cocaine problems, all this stuff going on. There's some really cool stuff out there. If you want a fun YouTube video to watch, go look at Marvin Gaye singing the national anthem at the 1983 NBA All-Star game in Los Angeles. And this is like the definition of early 1980s cool. I mean, like in one building at one time, right? And I just sort of get that same vibe with this show. It's like, this is the epicenter of the world for a few years. And they do a good job. I mean, obviously there's some fictionalized pieces of this, which I know we're going to talk about, but they're sort of capturing the essence of what it was like probably back in LA in the early 80s. I think they've done a really good job of that so far.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll be in the show. Could be, right? The
vibe,
the feel, it could be, right? The feel of it. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. I find it really interesting how it's shot, and part of me wants to, I don't know, nerd out in some way about how they did this technically. which is beyond me, but also I realize they're using some kind of filter or something at this point, right? But it's still striking to me because I mean precisely that filter, right? If people aren't actively paying attention to this, I really think it plays a role in terms of how the thing feels. It
Yeah.
doesn't look like that footage I was just mentioning. Like, you can go pull up real footage, real news footage, and things like that.
Right.
That's grainier, and the quality of this is better than that. It's not that grainy as the actual footage, but they have purposefully made it sort of grainy. So one of the first things that struck me about the show is just it looks different than like everything else on TV that I'm watching coming out, the past few years or right now. And that feeds into how it feels different also. Is that something that stood out to you also?
Yeah, and I imagine, as you said, if you're not just comparing it side by side with actual footage, I imagine you're watching this thing thinking, okay, if I just had set up a camera in the Lakers practice in 1981, this is what it would look like, right? When I came home and watched the footage. They just do, I think, a really strong job of capturing what the feel was like then. And obviously you and I watched
Yeah.
television, news, and sports in the early 80s. We get that sense of, yeah, this must have been what it was like if I was actually watching this thing in real time happening.
But they at the
And
same time,
so,
yeah, they're playing with it. I think this is
yeah,
great. I mean, the biggest thing I want to say about this show, and I'm kind of presuming people listening haven't watched the show, but if anyone hasn't, the biggest thing I would want to say about the show is I just find it to be so fun. It's like the most fun thing to watch to me the past couple of years. And I think this is a big part of it. But I was going to say, yeah, they also kind of seamlessly integrate some actual footage with
mhm.
stuff that they shot for the show. The style of how they present the characters in the show and the casting is really amazing to the extent that I mean the level to which people look like the actual people that they can
Yeah.
kind of jump between um actual footage of basketball from 1980 and something that they shot for the show and you hardly even notice. I mean, um
Yeah, I will say that not only John C. Riley playing Jerry Buss, but the actor playing Magic Johnson, the actor playing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, there are many ways, and perhaps it's the way this shot. It's almost uncanny how much they look like their counterparts. You sort of get
yeah,
away with that when you're not doing everything in 4K and you're not putting them up against one another. But it's pretty striking how well they've done with all that.
it really is. And we're going to mention some actors here. I'm going to get up the cast list just to not leave anyone out here because
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. So Quincy Isaiah as Magic Johnson. I mean, again, like I was, as I say, I was watching that footage where they interview him for the MVP, and I just been watching Winning Time. I was like, they did a really spot on job here. Solomon Hughes as Kareem, and then I was going to mention. I presume that you know this. People listening might not know this, but you've got Devon Nixon as Norm Nixon. You aware of this?
It's his son, right?
It's his son. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
I mean,
phenomenal.
so that's the one that kind of stands out where if you didn't realize that before you looked into it, you might almost be like, oh my God, how does this guy look exactly like Norm Nixon? Like he looks exactly like Norm. Yeah, that's his son. So, but I mean the others, yeah, they're just, doing good casting work. So, shout out to the casting directors on the show. Um and I know we wanted to talk about some of that too. You had some of the reactions to season one, which were largely negative, at least. I mean, you had a few people. Magic didn't seem too happy. Kareem didn't seem too happy. Jerry West threatened a lawsuit. Should we jump to Jason Clark's Jerry West here? What do you think about Jerry? Jerry West still alive, by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's been in the NBA since his playing days. I mean, he's still very active in the league and was very outspoken that this was not an accurate representation of who he was. And, he's really portrayed in the show as a real jerk, somebody that is a curmudgeon to everything that's going on, have to stick with the old ways, can't win with these this new way of doing things. And yeah, the real Jerry West didn't really take kindly to that. I don't think it ever went anywhere, but that's a really good, I think, representation of kind of the foil you need in a show like this.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I want to say a couple of things here. One, yeah, I looked into it. Did this go anywhere? Because he was threatening lawsuits. This was, back in 2022. And it looks like it didn't go anywhere. It didn't go beyond him threatening some kind of lawsuit. I wonder if he kept watching the show, because I kind of understand why he was mad, particularly at the beginning. You have some scenes in season 1 where Jerry West is like destroying his office, and things like this. Like he's a total rage. But I think it's kind of interesting because I actually find this character to be really endearing. I like him a lot. Yeah. Jerry West on the show, I like a lot.
Yeah, it does raise this interesting point, because obviously you've talked about what Jerry West thought, and he came out publicly, Magic Johnson not necessarily getting behind this. Not a lot of players coming to its defense. I want to say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a piece about how they have misrepresented some of the relationships. So with a show like this, you can't really, you can't do anything to take away from the actual games, from the scores, from the stats, from the actual history that's recorded and documented. You can't do anything about that. So those things are largely accurate, or are all accurate, but they have to clearly add some fictionalized drama to this based on what they're hearing was the reality. It's sort of a question I had about, what if you're, not a diehard scholar of 1980s NBA basketball, or what's the best way to watch this, to try to, are you watching it more towards, I want to learn about the season and what happened with these teams, or are you looking more towards, well, I want to hear about the story that they're telling, that may be somewhat fictionalized?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there is that overarching question of how accurate this is. It is based on a book, which we should mention, I guess, too, Jeff Pearlman's book called Showtime. They didn't name the show Showtime because, well, I think for obvious reasons, right? But so, there's at least some claim to journalistic accuracy there, Then I think the show is also taking creative license. And that means I don't think it's claiming to be precisely accurate. Like the show itself is not claiming to be an accurate representation of history. So trying to circle around to answer your question, I don't know. I think for me, largely, it is something I enjoy as television. And if I've thought about reading the book, but I haven't bothered to go read the book. What do you? What about you? Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've just thought about sort of the not tension between the two, but sort of how I'm pulled back and forth. I've been an NBA fan for a long time, so I know a lot of what's going to happen in terms of the games and the series and the history and the seasons. So they're not going to go through this season and say the Lakers won the 1981 NBA championship. They just didn't, and so they can't make that happen. And so what they can do, though, is sort of tell the story of what caused that to not happen, or the drama that may or may not have happened behind the scenes when it didn't happen. That's what I'm interested in. Is there is a line of truth here that they might sort of circumvent or take some roads around, but they're always hitting back on this story that actually happened, and that's what I find most interesting about it. As long as they say accurate to what. As you said, very, very strong reporting within the book that we've seemed to find has a lot of accuracy, a lot of integrity, as you mentioned.
Yeah, that's what I found myself constantly thinking. Well, okay, most of these things happened, and then of course certain things. Well, we don't know. Did Kareem make Magic bring him orange juice? in season one? Is that a real thing?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
I say, and I think that's probably a real thing. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe he's not real happy about how it's being portrayed, but there's probably a basis in reality there. So, but some of this other stuff, you know, like, uh, did Jerry Buss get mad and yell at his sons during a game of Monopoly?
Right.
Who knows? Like, probably
Yeah.
not. You know, they probably made that up. I mean, maybe not. I guess I don't know for sure. But you know, I think it's interesting, as you say, what they can do and are doing clearly is making some decisions about how to frame the story in a way that I think is interesting. Like, what's clear is the second season, I think clearly it's going to lead back to those 1984 NBA finals. And we already get there at the beginning. Pat Riley's giving the speech. He's like, they've won their championships. We've won our championships. We haven't played each other. This is the culmination of the rivalry between the Lakers and the Celtics, which is the big thing the show is playing on. This is they're making a choice about how to frame it. You don't have to look at NBA history that way. Certainly, you probably wouldn't look at NBA history that way if you're a 76ers fan, for example, right? But so I think that's interesting. And then I did want to mention, going all the way back to season one, to remind people that we started season one with Magic Johnson testing positive for HIV. Remember this?
Yeah, I do. That's right.
And then they jump back. So I mean, it seems relatively clear to me that the same kind of framing move in terms of the series as a whole would be what we would expect, that they probably would ultimately. We don't know if they'll get more seasons or how many more seasons, right? But that the plan seems to be that they would ultimately come back around to 1991, 1992, which is in various ways when everything falls apart.
Yeah, I think that's a very smart point, because they're clearly framing this season that same way that maybe they're framing, as you mentioned, the entire series, right? So we are assuming HBO greenlights this thing, headed towards 91, 92 when Magic makes this announcement. That's what they started the series with. Just as this season clearly is going to go through the 1984 NBA Finals. They started that way. We see that Pat Riley is giving this impassioned speech, as you said. We go back, loop back around to the beginning of the season in 80-81. Pat Riley is not even the head coach yet, right? So we know that something happens between then and 84 that moves Riley into that position. So it's kind of a, how far do we have to go? What are the points we have to hit along the way to get to this thing that you really want to see, which is finally Celtics versus Lakers?
Well, in the coaching stuff, I don't know. I will say this, you know, we're about the same age. So it's kind of interesting because this stuff is more in the background. I don't, you know, I was a baby or whatever, you know, it's not like I was watching the 1981 NBA season, or if I was a baby. I don't remember. But this history is in the background. I will say, in terms of learning history from the show, prior to watching season one, I really didn't know about Jack McKinney very much at all.
Oh, did you? No, not at all. Not at all.
And that was really striking to me. And I really like Jack McKinney, the character in the TV show. I don't know him in real life, but I find myself in season two even kind of thinking like, kind of hope they check in with Jack McKinney. They probably won't, because he's no longer a part of the Lakers story. I think he went to the Pacers. Is that right? You know, I think
he did go to the Pacers for a little bit. Yeah.
So, but there's certainly more coaching drama, and I can't claim that I know all of the details. Obviously, I could look it up with Westfall and Pat Riley. Both of those performances too, I think, are great. Siegel and Adrian Brody. I mean,
both of them have been.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they've been phenomenal. I mean, Siegel is this sort of historian, philosophizer, Shakespeare quoter. I mean, that's really trying to push something in a very, he's almost like this meek, modest guy trying to push this thing on his team. And we know lurking in the background of who Pat Riley becomes, who he is eventually, and sort of this aura that he demands when he finally becomes coach. I just think that they've really played off each other very, very well. And I'm interested to see sort of how they, knowing a little bit about the history of what happened there in the transition between coaches, how they play that off. Because something's going to happen probably by the halfway point of the season that shows us what transpired there.
Yeah. And Brody in particular to me, anyway. I mean, as someone, Pat Riley's been in my consciousness forever, practically in terms of basketball. And I think Adrian Brody's performance is really spot on, pretty great. I mean, again, you might think about Pat Riley now, but if you go watch some of that old footage, which I guess I'm recommending to people, it's not super entertaining other than to say like, oh, wow, we really kind of was like that, in 1980. His demeanor, his mannerisms, they're really doing a good job of representing that.
So if I made you pick one pairing on the show, would you pick Jason Segel and Adrian Brody, or John C. Reilly and Michael Chiklis as Red Auerbach?
I mean, Chiklis is great here. he is really, really good, right? And he's kind of razzing Jerry Buss in the one scene here in the season 2 premiere about this trade, which we were going to mention, right? If people don't know this, I don't know how much of the show will even fill this in specifically. This is like an infamous NBA trade where the Celtics traded, I think it was the number 1 overall pick. And then I think it was also like pick 13. And in exchange, they got pick 3 and Robert Parrish.
Yep.
Right? And then with pick 3, they took McHale.
Kevin McHale, University of Minnesota. Yep.
So you have in this one, and we only know this in retrospect. The show kind of plays it like Auerbach knows it at the time, which he's being cocky because he doesn't really, But in retrospect, we know that Boston managed to get 2 Hall of Fame players in this trade. And the number 1 pick, Joe Barry Carroll, we were talking about before we started recording, eminently respectable NBA career. I was looking at the stats. He would average something like 18 to 20 points, 7 or 8 rebounds.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a good player. Right?
Yeah. I mean, fine guard, good teammate, but to have the most to trade him for the most dominant front court in the 1980s was, it's just a no-brainer.
Yeah, because this sets up the I guess this is the original big 3 of the Celtics. Is that fair? There wasn't a Celtics big 3 before this big 3. Is that correct?
That's right.
There's a Celtics big 3 after this big 3, but okay. Of Bird, McHale, and Parrish. I wonder how much we'll see of that. The show very much tends to take the Lakers' perspective. So
I do hope at least an episode, if not more than that, and in further seasons, I imagine we'll see even more. But I hope at least an episode is the '84 finals, the first time these 2 teams meet in the final. See who McHale is, who Parrish is. We've seen Bird; he's this cocky, Indiana asshole who just loves to get under people's skin. Exactly who he was. I hope we get to see a good bit of who these Celtics players are and the dynamic between the 2. It's going to be at least an episode, if not more.
I'd love to hear Larry Bird, the real Larry Bird, react to his portrayal of the show also. He might just not, given, being Larry Bird. But I did really enjoy how in season 1, although they portrayed him in this way, they also got in there his real respect for Magic. They had that. He's sitting there watching the finals. He's like, this is great basketball going on here. And, so I wonder where it'll go. Like you were mentioning to me that we're going to end in 1984. Well, you have Michael Jordan being drafted in 1984, in the summer of 1984. Do you think Jordan's going to show up in this season?
Yeah, I mean, I wondered maybe this is me seeing one too many, MCU movies, but I wonder if there's like, an end season end credit or something that shows Michael Jordan, coming on the draft stage. They've already in the first episode in the premiere, they had kind of on in the background a TV that showed Isaiah Thomas, a commentator talking about James Worthy at North Carolina, talking about Sam Perkins, all these guys who would be in the league within a couple of years. I just think if you're ending a season at the end of the 1984 season in that finals, and then what 2 weeks later Michael Jordan is drafted, there's going to be something that segues into,
Yeah.
all right, this is coming next time. This guy who's about to revolutionize the league.
Well, so I think it'd be interesting. Now you got me thinking if it is almost like a post credits tag,
Yeah,
they might just use real footage. Because the
there you
biggest
go.
reason I don't think Michael Jordan will be in this season is I would be really stunned if they cast him already.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, is it going to be renewed for season 3? Is it going to be renewed for season 4? What's the overall
Yeah.
plan? I think we can speculate. I was starting to do this earlier. I think we can speculate that their plan is to end right there around 1991. I mean, there have been some people who have speculated that they could, in further seasons, go to the Kobe Shaq era and things like this. I mean, I guess they could if you want to keep this thing going. But in terms of this original arc, it seems pretty clear that it will end.
Yeah. I mean, to your point earlier, there's such a finality around that time. Magic's HIV announcement. Bird, I think in '92 has to end his career because of back injuries. That this time is where they both, rightly so, and obviously Magic comes back a couple years later for a few games, but they end their careers almost simultaneously. I mean, it seems like the ending's already written itself if they want to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, and the Pistons too. I mean, I
Yeah.
wonder, presuming there's a season 3, how much of the Detroit Pistons in?
Yeah.
Because meaningfully in the latter half of the 80s, I mean, you basically get a Pistons Lakers rivalry.
Yeah.
The Pistons, this ties back, asked me about growing up in Detroit. They won 2 championships in a row,
Right.
and they were going for a third one. And everywhere, at least in Detroit, I realize this is probably not national. Everywhere they were playing this 3-peat beat song. Have you heard this song? Has anyone heard it?
No.
It's
No.
like
No. No.
this like I don't know, hip hop song. And we were playing. It was like we're the 3-peat beat. Spoiler for basketball history: they did not 3-peat.
No. But that's
They
why you do
lost
this
to the
show.
Bulls.
Right. That's why you do this show centered around the Lakers, because after 1987, the Celtics are basically out of the picture, at least in terms of the NBA finals are concerned. And so then you can go into this whole period where the Lakers and the Pistons, I mean, just hated each other. You had this camaraderie between Magic and Isaiah Thomas, this kissing cousins thing that they were always known as, but man, they just hated each other, and that's going to make for a fantastic season,
I mean,
assuming they do that.
I really do. Give me the bad boy Pistons on here. Come on.
Oh yeah,
Do it,
oh yeah,
HBO. Give us the bad boys. Give us the Pistons. But then, in terms of the time frame, it was really striking me. I was double checking some of this stuff instead of just working from memory. So Detroit does not 3-peat. They lose to the Bulls,
yeah,
who win the championship. And then basically, no more Lakers, no more Celtics, no more Pistons. It's Michael Jordan time. But it's really like because you mentioned some stuff about the other teams, but the Pistons too, they fell apart after that failed 3-peat. I'd have to double check some of the details, but I think like Vinnie Johnson left, and the team falls apart. Chuck Daly retires after another year or two, and then it's like all of a sudden they're in the bottom half of the league, and Grant Hill's the only player you've ever heard of. It's really striking to think about, and that you mentioned that Bird retired. All of that happens right at the same time, which I guess I hardly realized having lived through it. that
Yeah.
it wasn't just that Jordan entered the league and took over, but the old guard all kind of went away at the same time too.
Yep. That's 100% right. That these tragic things happen to Magic and to Bird. The Pistons dissolve. The Blazers with Clyde Drexler never became who people thought they would be, and it just becomes. I mean, except for his retirement years, it becomes the Michael Jordan story for 8 straight years at that point.
Yeah. Well, Blazers were still in the mix. Blazers,
Yeah.
the Trailblazers never get enough respect. But
but this has just been a great show so far. I mean, especially through one season, one episode, because you get to kind of revisit these things that that we love, revisit these stories that are so interesting, and see them in a fresh take, no matter how fictionalized or real it may be. It's just been fascinating to see how they're telling this story about something that you and I clearly both love so much. So, you mind if I ask you one more question here before we wrap up?
Yes, go.
All right. So we've recently talked about one show. We talked about all 3 seasons of Righteous Gemstones. We're now talking about Winning Time. So now we have the system built by Paul Westphal, and we have the system built by Amber Gemstone.
Yeah.
Which system are you taking if I give you one?
which system? It's funny because it's such a generic name.
Yeah.
Like, did Jack McKinney call his thing the system too? He could have.
Oh no.
But I don't know that he branded it in that way.
Do you want to save your marriage or make some shots? That's the choice you have to make today. That's all you get.
I think, I think, and now, I mean, I'm not gonna, don't frame it in that way. Let's dig into the details a little bit, right? What is the gemstone system, Amber system? It's some weird thing like they're putting fake gemstones in a jar.
Yeah.
When they have negative thoughts about their partner or something like that. Okay. The Westfall system is going to be my choice here. We're totally comparing apples and oranges, but
Right.
that the idea here is shoot. But it's more than that, right? Because they don't dig into this fully on the show, but he does tell the team they've kind of analytically figured out where they're good in terms of taking shots. So, go to your position, which is one of these positions we know we're good from. You get the ball, shoot.
Yep.
And like mathematically, statistically, this is going to work out.
This is the leading edge of advanced NBA analytics, right? The idea of shot charts and where you're good, where you're not. Go to where you're good from. If you get the ball in that spot, you're shooting, and he says you're going to get benched if you don't do that. So yeah, take as many shots as you possibly can from your spot. So yeah, that's gonna win for me too.
Yeah, I mean the novelty of it. I mean that was part of it with Jack McKinney too, which I didn't really know about last season, which I thought was fascinating. And part of what's interesting about focusing on the Lakers here is not just that you have the Lakers dynasty, but the revolutionizing of basketball. And I think this kind of continues that in a meaningful way with the system.
Yeah, I mean, just as a parallel, the Showtime eventually becomes the Mike D'Antoni 7 Seconds or Less Suns to the early 2000s, which eventually becomes the 3-point revolution that we see here in the modern NBA. So yeah, it all ties back to this run and go as fast as you can, shoot as much as you can, Lakers.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you mentioned the Suns because they never won anything.
Yeah, that's right.
It didn't work for them, right? It didn't work for them. So they're a weird middle point of the story. Somehow bridging the gap between the old Lakers and we were talking the Warriors, probably.
Yeah.
All right, man.
Well, great. So we should keep it going. We should hit episode 2 next week, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I'll be watching it. This is fun. Hopefully people enjoy listening to us talk about basketball. We're also still talking about TV. And so, yeah, we'll go ahead and pick up with Winning Time season 2, episode 2 next week. As always, thank you for listening to the podcast. You can follow the site, tvobsessive.com. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, the service formerly known as Twitter. You want to plug anything before we go, Ryan? Get in there.
Yeah, that sounds good. You
X
can
account.
find us both. Yeah, you can find us both on X. You can find us both of our content on the site, tvobsessive.com. Looking forward to going through this show with everybody. And yeah, this is in our wheelhouse. So I'm looking forward to doing this. Hope you'll join us next time. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
All right. See you next time, Ryan.